because there's been questions in the past as to what size O-rings do I need. So the most common O-ring in resealing just about all your daisies is going to be the O-ring that goes on the piston. This also includes the 1977 dual O-ring piston and the valve body O-ring for the seal. And that will be a size 113 O-ring for both the piston and the seal. For the O-ring on the poppet, those O-rings haven't changed even through the poppet redesign, and those are going to be a O-ring number 012. You can buy these in bulk. I usually source them from Amazon or Mr. O-Ring online, but they're common O-ring, not hard to find. They're cheap. I really prefer to pay a little bit more and go with a Viaton. And generally on the piston and the seal, I'll use they also come in a hardness rating. So on the piston, definitely I use a Duro rated 75, and I'll also use a 75 on the seal most of the time. If you can use a 90 on the seal if you want. It's a harder material, but you want on the piston for sure, you want the softer material. You want to go with the 75. And then on the poppet, you can go either way. Lots of times I'll use a 90 hardness on the poppet, sometimes 75. I don't know that there's a tremendous difference. But again, I prefer Viaton as the material. And the one oddball O-ring, which I ran into on another 922 build, an older build, is the original seal and some of the older 922s used a different O-ring or an additional O-ring, and it was a 016, and it's very similar in size to the 113, but the difference is it has a thinner cross section, and I'm not sure about the OD and ID, but it's similar in size, but don't mistake it. It is different, and you cannot use a 113 in replacement. It has to be that 016. And so if you have an older 922 and you're having trouble figuring out what that thinner O-ring is, it's a 016. And again, I'll have to give all credit to Ron over at Gateway to Air Guns, because I had one of those guns and was in the process of rebuilding it and was struggling to figure out what size that O-ring was, and he was one that pointed me in the right direction on that, and I was able to get that gun built. But in any case, now I'm going to go off and clean these parts and get them ready for reassembly and hopefully get this gun back working. All right, so I did a really thorough clean job on the compression cylinder. Now looking down into the tube, I can see the retaining ring. It's nice and clean. It's real dry. So we've got new seals on everything. The spring seems okay. The hammer looks all right. I was a little concerned it might be bent, but it doesn't appear to be. So the next thing we're going to do is assemble the gun, and we're going to do some tests before we completely assemble the gun. So whenever I'm troubleshooting a gun, after I replace any of the obvious problems, the next thing I'll do is assemble the valve body. Then I'll assemble the compression tube and valve body. I'll install those in the frame. Then I'll install the pump assembly, put those pins in, and with just the pump assembly and the valve body assembled in the frame, we'll try to pressurize the pressure chamber in the valve body just with a few pumps, listen to see if we hear any air escaping. If we do, that's the time to go ahead and stop, tear it back down and diagnose the problem and fix it. And we want to do that before we get the entire gun assembled. That way, if there is an issue, we're not having to disassemble the entire gun. We just have a few steps to go through to get back at whatever the possible problem is. So don't just put a new seal kit in the gun and put the whole gun back together before you try to find out if it's going to seal. It's going to save you a lot of headache if you just get the minimum amount of the gun assembled to be able to test it. At the same time, don't be pumping it up 10 times or more, or even more than 2 or 3 times for that test, because you're going to be releasing the air straight to atmosphere. You want to use caution when you do that so you don't have anything blowing towards you or in your face and so forth. But we'll demonstrate how to do that, and without any further hesitation, I'm going to go ahead and show you how to reassemble all these parts. So the first thing we got to do is, now that we've replaced all our O-rings, we got fresh seals, we know we got a good elastomer, everything's good, is to put a light coat of oil on everything. That way you're not trying to assemble dry O-rings and so forth. And my oil preference is Slip 2000 EWL, or Extreme Weapon Lube. I've just had really good success with this. I think what's recommended is 30 weight non-detergent motor oil. Also works good from all accounts that I've heard, but I've always just used that EWL on all my guns, whether they're firearms or air guns. All right, so I put a little drop of oil and wiped it around the poppet O-ring. This is, being an older valve body, has the screw-in poppet, so we're just going to run that up finger tight to begin with. And just kind of be cautious, make sure your O-ring seats, because if you squish or cut that O-ring during installation, it's not going to seal. So I started to run that in with the O-ring assembled on the poppet, and I don't know if that's showing on the camera, but the O-ring's interfering between the nut head of the poppet and the valve body, and if I continue to do that, then it's likely going to cut that O-ring. So I want to move that around. And there she went down into the valve body. Just run that in hand tight. All is good in the world. So then we'll just take our wrench and just, like with 2 fingers, just snug that up. You don't want to put a lot of torque on that. That's all it takes. Okay, that looks good. So the next thing we'll do is assemble the fire control group. This gun, we will be reusing the flat spring, so the first thing to do is place that flat spring in the valve body. These things can be extremely irritating during reassembly. So when you have it, the O-ring or the flat spring slid in place, it's got almost like a point on the end. You want to make sure that the ramp is coming up into this cutout in the valve body, and that lip or point is sliding underneath. It's almost like a tab right there before it leads into the breech. And there's a slot in the flat spring that lines up with a hole in the top of the valve body, so you want to make sure that those are lined up as well. Then we put our hammer in and slide the fork underneath the crimp washer on the poppet. Then we take our smooth hammer pin, the one that does not have a swedge mark on it or knurling, and we slide that through the hammer and valve body. So that's the easy part. Now for the terrible part, which is putting the hammer in. I say terrible, I mean that half-heartedly and somewhat sincerely. So now we place our spring on the spring pad of the trigger, and we've got to line up this top tab on the trigger with that slot in the flat spring and hole in the, or slot hole, whatever, in the valve body, and get the spring on the spring pad of the hammer. Now getting all this to line up and the hole in the trigger and valve body to line up is sometimes a lot of fun. And then holding all that in place while trying to insert that pin is a real joy too. And if you can do that easily on the first attempt, man, power to you, brother. Aside from a rougher trigger pull, another reason I generally don't reuse that flat spring is because it makes this job right here a lot easier if you don't. But it is a safety thing, so I'm not endorsing ditching the flat spring. It's just if you do ditch it, realize the gun can be fired with the bolt open. That's the purpose of the flat springs, to prevent the gun from firing with the bolt open, because how that works is when the bolt is slid forward in the battery, then it pushes that flat spring down to where it can move forward and allow the trigger to fire. So when you're assembling this, if you were struggling like you just saw me doing, what you need to do is push that flat spring down to allow you to manipulate the trigger into position. So now I was able to press that trigger pin in and reassemble. I can test it just like that, cock it. You'll notice the flat spring slides back as the trigger moves forward, and you can see it will not fire because that flat spring is engaging the valve body. But if I press that flat spring down, it'll fire. And by me pressing that flat spring down, what I'm doing is the exact same action that the bolt does when you slide it forward in the battery. It pushes that flat spring down so that the trigger can fire. And the flat spring catches and prevents it from firing when the bolt slid back and there's no pressure on the flat spring. So flat spring down, it fires. So now we've pretty much got our valve body back together. And with that being said, the next thing we will do is put a little oil on our compression tube. Because again, I thoroughly cleaned this guy and used solvent and lots of paper towels and Q-tips and everything to make sure there was no debris, especially around the retaining ring. This tube looked like it had been cleaned. It was in good shape. It looked pretty mirror finished, but you could still see there was some probable old seal and elastomer material. It was kind of trapped around that pressed ring, so we wanted to make sure that wasn't causing our seals to seize up. And this gun, I was told, went through a new reseal, which, seeing these Ron parts in it, I completely believe that. And I was just exercising the seal here, and it's still real good and elastic, feels good. It's definitely sealing up against the compression tube well, so no need to change that. We'll drop our spring back in. Then we put our valve body compression tube washer down, O-ring up, and make sure that O-ring seats properly all the way around that washer. We can slide our valve body on there, press that in, make sure we got good seat. That looks good. So next thing I want to do is go ahead and start that guy. You want to carefully guide this compression tube into the frame. Don't just force it in there, because if the front of the compression tube catches on the frame or something and you nick the compression tube, then it's very likely to cut the piston O-ring when you insert the piston. All right, now we've got our valve body and compression tube back in the gun. We're going to put the valve body retaining pin in. That will hold the valve body into the frame like that. So the only thing we need to do now to be able to do a seal check is install the piston assembly and pump assembly. So that's just right the opposite order as it was during disassembly. So sometimes when you take this apart, you may not remember, well, which way does the piston face? There's two options. There's the hollow facing side out or the solid facing side out. So what you want to do is imagine you're looking at the gun assembled, looking at the belly of the gun, looking at the pump arm in this orientation. So if you raise that pump arm, you should see the solid face of your piston assembly, like this. All right. I don't think that actually matters, but it is how it comes from the factory. So that's usually how I always just reassemble it. But to be honest, I don't mechanically see any reason it wouldn't work the other way. But probably for aesthetics and just because that's the way it came from the factory, that's the way I do it. And we put our pivot pin back in. Get our two guides. And now we've got our pump assembly. Now some of the older guns, like for instance the stamped metal pump arm guns, you might have two rubber washers that go on either side of the pump arm between the frame and the pump arm. Just be careful when you're disassembling those guns. Those little washers are easy to lose or forget to put back in there. But you definitely want to use those to keep from having bad metal-to-metal experiences with those guns. So now we just slide that piston assembly into the frame, being careful to watch our O-rings. We'll slide our two guides down there, and the guides will fit in these tracks that are made by the frame. And we're going to bring that just up to the piston, or the compression tube and piston, to where they're touching. And there went my retaining pin for the valve body. But we're not going to push that in yet. I'm going to take just a couple drops of oil and put them on those guides. Now I'm going to go diving for my valve body pin. And sometimes when you're assembling these, to keep these pins from dropping out, occasionally I might put just a little piece of Scotch tape or something on there to hold the pin in, but it's not necessarily, but it can be aggravating. So now we've got everything lined up. We've got our valve body assembly in. We've got the retaining pin in. We've got our piston lined up. One thing I did not mention, and I need to go back and address, is on these guns, there's no tab retaining the compression tube from moving forward in the frame like the new guns. So what holds this compression tube in position is this hole in the compression tube lines up with the slot in the valve body. So when you assemble that, the valve body retaining pin slides through the compression tube and the valve body, which holds both the valve body and the compression tube in place. So you want to make sure that the compression tube is actually seated all the way on the valve body so that it's retained by the pin. So now that we've got our piston assembly in here and we got our valve body and compression tube in, we're going to push down on that piston, which will push our compression tube down. and then we can get that retaining pin in there to hold the whole thing together. Now we've locked our compression tube to the valve body to the frame. Then we just continue to press the piston or pump assembly down until we can rotate the pump arm to line up with the frame holes, and we can slide that in. Now then, the pump mechanism is together. And for whatever reason, she is not pressurizing. It feels like air is not getting past the seal. Alright everybody, so mystery solved on this gun. What it turned out to be was the front seal. And strangely enough, the reason that wasn't more of an obvious problem, excuse me while I reach over here, is that it was brand new. So is this little seal, it's the front seal that seals the or captures the air from the piston into the compression chamber, and evidently it is a little oversized. And what was the problem is that it wasn't allowing air to bypass or go past the seal into the compression chamber. So what would happen is when the gun was pumped, it was just sandwiching the air between the piston and the seal, but the air wasn't passing the seal into the compression chamber. That's why the pump handle was kicking back out. It's because there was pressure between the piston and the chamber that wasn't getting into the chamber. That took a minute to figure out because, again, it was a brand new seal. Never seen that before, but I knew air wasn't getting past the seal, so just to try it, I replaced that seal with a different new seal, and everything works great, which is another reason you want to check when you have the gun assembled to this point to make sure everything's working, is that it makes it so much quicker to take it back apart and troubleshoot it. So again, once you've got the gun assembled to this point, you've got the valve body in, the compression tube in, the pump assembly in. We can just manually cock the gun by pressing the cocking fin down. Give it a pump and listen for air. If you hear air escaping, then you need to troubleshoot and find out where that is. You can listen and kind of isolate the area it's coming from, whether it's coming from the compression tube seal or if it's leaking through the poppet or what have you. But just, I like to give it a couple, maybe 3 pumps. And you can feel if it's pressurizing. You can hear if it's leaking. Right now, it sounds great. I don't hear any air leaking. Then I can press down on the flat spring, pull the trigger, and verify it's releasing air. So everything's functioning properly now with this gun, so we can continue with the reassembly. So this being a clamped on barrel, the first thing we're going to do is replace the barrel seal, put it back in. This is a new barrel seal from Ron. It's an upgrade from the old factory seals in the fact that Ron incorporates an O-ring in the seal for a better barrel to valve body seal. So you want to position that such that the hole in the seal is lined up perfectly with the hole in the valve body or the transfer port. It does matter. There's a larger distance on one side of the seal than the other from the O-ring, so it is directionally important how you install that. So you want to visually verify you've got it in correctly. The next thing we're going to do is take the barrel, align the hole in the barrel with the hole in the seal, the transfer port, and align that machine flat on the barrel with the register on the valve body. And sometimes that seal can push the barrel off that flat or register. So you just want to kind of get a good visual on it to begin with. Then you'll take your barrel clamp and slide the tab in the hole on the valve body and hold that in position while you screw the clamp screw back down into the valve body. And again, this isn't the strongest metal in the world, so we want to make sure that we don't over tighten that screw and strip out the valve body. That would be very bad. But it wouldn't be the absolute end of the world if you did do that. You could take some alloy 1, fill that hole, re-drill it, and re-tap it. But we want to really avoid that, because even doing that, it probably won't ever be as strong as it was originally. And once you've tightened that down a little bit, you want to kind of push and pull on the barrel to make sure that you got that machine flat in the register. Now at this point, the barrel will be able to turn a little bit back and forth, but it should, when you try rotating it, it'll rotate maybe a quarter turn or less. And you'll feel it stop in one direction, rotate it in the other direction, you'll feel it stop. And what you're doing is you're finding where that flat is catching on the register. So turn it all the way one side, turn it all the way other side, figure about how much of a turn that is, and then split the difference. That should get your holes lined up perfectly. And then give that clamp screw just one last little snug up, and it's done. So from there, it's just like reassembling basically any other daisy. So we can take our barrel shroud at this point and slide it on. Okay, now we got our barrel shroud lined up. Next thing I'm going to do is slide the stock in. And just like during disassembly, we want to press that cocking lever in so that our receiver half with the bolt can slide on there without hitting the cocking pin. So we're going to take our safety and trigger guard assembly, line the tabs up, slide it on. We'll take our bolt handle, slide it in, take the bolt, and assemble the sliding handle and bolt. Now, if this gun had the spring retainer, that'd be the point you'd want to insert your spring retainer before sliding it onto the gun. But this gun having the detent actually in the pump handle is we don't have to do that. It's nice. All right. So we just kind of slide that on. Sometimes that trigger assembly or trigger guard can pop out. Just kind of push it back on there. And then we'll flip it over. Drop in our other receiver half. And just take your time. Sometimes getting everything lined up can be a bit of a trick, especially with the stock. And if it doesn't close all the way, make sure your bolt's back. And just kind of keep working with it, checking your trigger guard. You don't want to break a tab on your trigger guard because it's misaligned. We're just holding it together. We make sure that all the tabs for the trigger guard are lined up and in their receivers. One thing that helps is to put the right hand receiver on first and then slide the bolt into battery. Put the right receiver half on first, slide the bolt into battery. That'll help keep the bolt in position while you slide your left receiver half on. Sometimes that bolt can want to torque up, so you may have to come in at an angle to get the bolt in the slide groove and then roll the left-hand receiver on if that bolt keeps trying to torque up. So it can be a little bit aggravating sometimes getting those receiver halves lined up, but just work with it, be patient, don't try to force it. That's how you'll break a trigger guard or break a bolt. Now we simply reinsert the screws the exact same way we did during disassembly. I usually will hold the two receiver halves tightly together, insert one of the small screws on each side of the receiver just to help keep it in place for the rest of the assembly.
Okay.
And once I do one of the small screws on each half, I'll come in here and hold the receiver halves together very tight and assemble the stock screw on these older vintages. On the newer guns, it's the same thing. There's just more screws, and of course, I highly recommend bridging the receivers. But if you do bridge the receivers, all it is just additional screws that have to be installed as far as assembly and disassembly. Oh yeah, those receivers are tightly assembled. That looks good. We've tested, make sure that it's holding air and releasing air. That check looks good. About to have this old girl back in service. Now you can see my pump assembly pin started to come loose. You want to, before you reassemble the forearms, you want to make sure that that pump pin, pivot pin's in there well. Then again, make sure you line up your slots and hooks on the forearms and then slide them down and in position. Same thing with this one. There'll be a register on the front, so we'll have to come in at a slight angle to hold that register out, slide it down, and make sure your front registers line up. And put your last two screws in. All right, now she's back together. Well, one thing we did not cover in this rebuild video was the piston assembly rebuild, but if you go back and look at our PBL power mod, it goes through all the steps of disassembling and reassembling piston assembly. In that video we were modifying the piston assembly, but as far as the steps and the process for disassembly, reassembly, replacing the elastomer and so forth, the steps are identical. So that video will show you how to do that. The only other thing we've got to do here is I'm going to drop a single shot tray in this gun and she'll be ready to go. Safety work. So we're going to give it one last functional test now that we've completely reassembled the gun. She's good to go. She's back in action. All right, so this gun, like I said, like many other 922s, these shot trays get lost or they're hard to find. I've got a model for these. This is a 3D printed one. It just slides in where the factory shot tray went. And we just slide it in until it lines up with the probe. And now we're good to go. New shot tray, new gun. Rebuilt old gun, and puts a nice vintage Daisy back in action. See ya.